Actively managing your personal brand is critical if you want to make a significant impact in the areas of your life important to you. I'm Garry Browne, the Personal Brand Catalyst. I've spent most of my life working in the world of branding products. More recently, I've been exploring the world of personal branding and wrote a book on this, Brand New, Brand You. And the podcast has come out of this as a way to share first-hand experiences from some of Australia's most recognised personal brands.
Gemma Tognini is an influential social and political commentator, columnist, writer, broadcaster, and award-winning business owner. Gemma writes a leading opinion column each Saturday in the Weekend Australian, which is read by an average of 4 million people across print and digital platforms each month. She has a unique ability to tap into the conversations taking place around boardrooms and breakfast tables all around Australia, with her writing making her one of the paper's most popular columnists. Day to day, Gemma is the founder and executive director of GT Communications, a boutique corporate affairs and consumer PR firm with offices in Sydney and Perth that specialises in building, growing and protecting the reputations of its client partners. The company recently celebrated its 20th anniversary and partners with clients here, nationally and around the world. As a writer, Gemma has become known for sharp, insightful and fearless commentary on a wide range of issues affecting everyday Australians, be it politics and policy, social issues, or topics other than those who are not brave enough to tackle. Gemma brings a sharp view, a deft touch and a unique insight to the issues she writes about. Her columns drive debate and influence conversations. Gemma is a previous winner, 2014, and a finalist 2017 in the prestigious Telstra Business Awards. She has served as a non-executive director on Surf Life Saving Western Australia, Salvation Army in Western Australia, and the Starlight Children's Foundation.
Gemma, thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's an
It's
absolute privilege and pleasure to be sitting here having a chat to you, someone who is absolutely prominent when it comes to communication and branding. And today we have the opportunity to have some really good discussion about what actually makes a brand and how do you define your brand?
Is that a good question to start with? How do I define my brand? Wow. I was thinking about that very question again as I was walking up the street here. And do you know, I have to say, it's only recently that I've thought about my own personal brand. And I want to qualify that because intellectually or rationally, I would say, of course, everyone has a personal brand. But in terms of my career progression, which has not been by any means linear, and has just involved, I think the best way to describe my own career progression has been saying yes to many things and sort of long faithfulness in the same direction, if that makes sense. So in my case, I never sort of thought, well, what's my brand and how am I positioning that in front of people on a personal level? Very much about the business. What does the business stand for? But I think since social media has become more of a trap and more of a platform that is a little bit wild and woolly, I've thought very seriously about A, what platforms I'm on, and B, how do I engage and how do I want people to perceive me? So my own personal brand, that's a really, really, for me, a tricky question to answer. I think it's still evolving because I'm still evolving, even though I've been doing this job for 20 years. It's not so much something I think that has a destination, personally. I think it's something that you can continue to evolve. For example, I am many things at once. I'm an award-winning business owner, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a consultant, I'm a strategist, I'm an advisor, I'm a crisis manager, I'm a columnist, I'm a writer. Mm-hmm. Wrap it all up any way you want, Garry.
A multi-talented, multimedia.
Child of a migrant. True story.
So we'll come on to that in a moment, but
sure.
Let's go back to the question of maybe how do you define you, Gemma, as opposed to Gemma the brand? Have you thought of it in
Oh,
two different
you're doing
ways?
all the tricky ones straight up. Yes, I have actually. I actually have, and that's a really good. I can think of a really good example of that. So let's use Instagram as a social media platform that I use, and I have two accounts. One is an open account that is very much about Gemma, the writer, the businesswoman, the public part of my life, which I sort of say through gritted teeth, which I can explain a bit later. And then I have a private account that no one would know about or recognise because it's not my real name. That's just for my family and close friends. Less than 100 people on that account. And that's my real life, which I share with the people who I know and love. And the other one is my working life. And that's a really good practical example, I think, of what people can sort of tangibly delineate.
Right, so you actually have two different
accounts on that one platform.
brands in
Yeah.
the sense of your family look at you as one.
I don't think of that as a brand. I think of that as that is me being able to be completely myself with the people who I love, whereas my public account is the parts of my life that I choose to share, my professional opinions, my columns, my writing, my views on various things. That is the public domain. And I think for the people listening, for a bit of context, I started my career in the public domain. I was a journalist for many, many years in Western Australia, straight out of university into the highest rating radio station in WA, then to the highest rating TV station in WA. So for the first 12 years of my working life, I had a public persona. And then I quit journalism in 2003 to start my company. And then I had close to a decade of just glorious, blessed private life. I didn't, I'd shut the door on media and thought, that's a lovely chapter. It's been great. No regrets, moving on to something else. And quite by accident found myself back in media around 2015 after I won the Telstra Business Award. A Business Owner of the Year that was. I found myself accidentally back in the public eye in the capacity of an opinion columnist, which I'd never done before. And like I alluded to earlier, it was just a case of someone asking me, would you like to write a column? And I thought, I'll give it a go. And here we are. Here we are a few more years down the track. So I think that's why I guess I think of a brand as an evolving thing. Unless you're a person who has been, for example, an M&A lawyer for 20 years or politician for 20 years.
So then how do you ever think about how people perceive you?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean...
is that a self-conscious, or as in you feel self-conscious, or it's more to do with the way people perceive you in the way you operate? You have the same mindset on a personal basis as opposed to a commercial basis? Yeah,
I think it's a bit of both. I think people who know me well will tell you what you see is what you get. I'm very fortunate in that many of my clients over the last 2 decades have become close friends. So I think that speaks to the person that I am and the business that I run and the team that I run. Values, you can't fake values. So, for example, I think another good way to describe it is what I have as a commercial brand, if you like. It's not that I'm a different person. It's just that perhaps I wouldn't talk about if I was having a health challenge or, how I felt about my father dying, although I have written about that. So the challenge for me, I guess, at a brand level is how much of my personal life do I share? And as a writer, the tricky path to navigate there is that power comes from authenticity. And to be a writer who connects with an audience as a columnist is supposed to, part of the territory comes with that place of vulnerability and disclosure.
And humanity.
I had someone write to me after a column recently, sometime within the last 3 months. I can't remember the subject matter that I was writing about that weekend. And of course I write for the Australian newspaper. And they said, every time you write, I feel as if you are inviting me into your confidence. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing to say and a timely reminder of what the responsibility of a columnist is. And if you flip that across to my commercial life, and to be clear, that's 99% of my life, running the business and advising clients, you have to advise clients from a place of authenticity and partnership. You have to care beyond the transaction. One of our DNAs, this speaks to brand, the key part of our DNA is we value relationship over transaction. Every commercial relationship will have challenges. You know that. You've been around corporate life forever. Every commercial relationship will have challenges and pressure points in its lifetime. And what is the difference between a split or a moving forward is relationship.
Absolutely.
Genuine relationship in the bank for both parties to draw on that helps you navigate through whatever that challenge is. You
Correct.
cannot do it without relationship, and you cannot have relationship with trust, and you cannot have trust without disclosure.
So you've just told me that there is actually very little between you, Gemma, and your personal position and your commercial position, because you have to demonstrate, for you to be a good, strong brand,
Yes.
those values.
Yeah,
and those-
absolutely. It's absolutely.
so it crosses over.
It does cross over. There's no hard and fast line. I didn't get the chance to be a parent, so I don't have children to consider. But if I was a parent, for example, the line I would draw, for example, was you don't get to see my kids on my public account. My dog was another thing. My dog was Insta famous, bless his dearly departed soul. But that sort of thing. When I, everybody is entitled to have that inner part of their life that is protected for their nearest and dearest.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you don't share your values more broadly.
So reputation's obviously critical for you.
Yes.
As a person. When did that occur in your life? When did you first become aware that reputation was so important to you?
Do you mean as a function of the
individual?
business, or
As an individual?
That's a great question. I would have to say it was when I began my career as a journalist, because the very first, I think it was my first week in news at 6PR in Perth. Hello to all the 6PR listeners. I was sent to cover the trial of a former deputy premier who had been accused of fraud without even being a little bit tried. In the years coming out of WA Inc., there were a lot of politicians going to court
Absolutely.
in WA.
Yeah.
So, and when I was on work experience in my final year of university, I did some time with the Nine Network and went and tagged along to some of the WA Inc. Royal Commission hearings. So very early on in the piece, it was quite plain to see that you're one day the chook and the next day you're the feather duster. So, yeah, very powerful examples of that.
So that's when reputation was critical?
I don't know if
that
it was
became
critical, but it was
prominent to
on
your
the radar. You know, as I grew, I started my career when I was 20. So, you grow in maturity. You know nothing when you're 20, slightly more when you're 30. Knew a little bit by 40. I'm pretty comfortable with 50 as we're going on, but still learning. And I think as I started the business, I understood the more strategic impact of it, but more the need for it to be of substance. And by that I mean you can't fool voters more than once. You can't fool your consumers. And if you've got stakeholders in your corporate world, they're pretty savvy. But I also feel like we owe them as people in leadership or business or whatever. You owe people your best, and you owe people the transparency of understanding who you are and what you stand for.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier about being the daughter of an immigrant.
Yeah, my dad came to Australia in 1956 on a boat.
I thought you might have actually talked about, and I thought we had a very brief discussion, but we were talking not too long ago, but about reputation, because obviously the way your family came to this country, obviously it was important to actually build and recognise and get recognised for who they were and what they did.
Actually, not so much, to be honest. My family, my mum, for the record, was born in Brisbane to a middle-class Australian family and met my dad when he was doing national service. But I think, talking to my late grandparents and my late father at the time, over the years, they wanted to build a life, and the reputation came as a result of what they'd built. So they came from as economic migrants after the war, and my auntie tells me they settled in a little town West Australian listeners would know called Quinnanup.
Quinnanup.
Yeah,
Yes, I know
Quinnanup.
Quinnanup.
Oh, you know
Yeah.
Quinnanup, so cute. Back then it was a milling town. Now it's more tourism and all that sort of stuff. But Rita, my auntie, says everyone was from somewhere else. Like everyone was a post-war migrant in that town in those years. And they were all wanting to build a life. And I think a whole cohort of migrants not just European migrants after the war, but subsequently Greek migrants and, Vietnamese and Chinese migrants. You build a reputation based on the contribution to the community, which stems from the desire to build a better life than the one you left.
Which is all about building your reputation.
Sure, but not deliberately.
No.
Not by way of the reputation isn't the aim, the life is the aim.
It just happens that way.
Yeah,
and so
the byproduct.
The byproduct, and as children, I guess, we see the way our parents...
Totally.
And we
osmosis.
We learn it either openly or internally.
Yeah, bit of both. And it's funny you should say that. I think the reputation being a byproduct, a great, powerful example of that is it's an Australian colloquialism, worked like a migrant, migrant work ethic. That is an example of a collective reputation built by a cohort of people who based on a set of behaviours.
Correct. It's a great segue into behaviours and values.
Yes.
So where did you learn your values?
Oh, at home.
All of them?
That's a trick question. I mean, the ones that are formative for sure, because you're a young person, and I often say to people that I learnt during my time in commercial television, I learnt everything about the kind of boss I did and didn't want to be, just through observation and being an employee. And I'll leave that one right there.
Oh, no, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I had some tremendous bosses in my time in TV and some pretty average ones as well. So, and I think you can look back and be gracious in the sense that everybody's learning at different stages of their lives. But, my values around work ethic and respect and accountability and ownership were definitely from my parents and my grandparents. And we're a very small family. So by extension, my auntie and uncle as well. It's, we're a very, very small family who spent every Friday night at my non and nonna's having dinner and every Sunday afternoon having lunch at their house. And I just thought as a young kid in Perth that that's what every family did. And it was a bit of a shock to me when I realised Aussie families don't do that. And not a criticism, but
it's interesting.
It was like, oh gosh, what do you mean you don't spend every waking weekend hour with your grandparents and your family and your extended aunties and uncle? That's what we did. So definitely my values in that sense came from home.
So in your commercial life, business life, etc., have your values ever been tested?
Oh, all the time. All the time. I remember once in the newsroom when I was still a journalist, one of my colleagues who was in the sports team, not in the news team, we were just chit-chatting. It had been a particular week in the newsroom. And for the life of me, I can't remember what the story I was working on was. It was so long ago. But I remember him saying to me, it must be hard because you have your ethics tested on the daily. And in a newsroom, anyone who says that it's not happening is, I don't think, working in the right way. And I just said to him, I need to be able to look myself in the mirror at night. It's really simple. No one's accountable for the state of my soul other than myself, and no one's accountable for the state of my conscience other than myself. So there was that sort of dynamic that I worked through with varying degrees of success during the 10 years I was in media. But in corporate life, it's everything from the little things to the big things being how I treat my team and how I expect to be treated, how we treat our client partners and how we expect them to treat us. And the little things that, like the cliche is true, how you behave when no one's watching.
Correct. So values and behaviours aligned bring great trust and credibility. When they're out of alignment, it's no good. It's bad news. And also I think, I've been in business 20 years now, 20 years and a few months, and you don't know. I think I look back when I started and thought I knew nothing, and you don't know how to manage those tricky situations that you get into, conflict, for example, or inappropriate behaviour. And I always say to clients, new clients at least, I'm a terrible game player, Garry. I'm hopeless. I'm good at briscola, which is an Italian card game, but I'm not good at, the Machiavellian garbage that sometimes goes on in corporate life. So I don't bother. I just play a straight bat, sometimes to my detriment, but more often than not to my favour. So you can sleep at night.
I can sleep at night, one, but B, I think when you come to a person and you set a boundary, like you get what you tolerate in business, in life, in relationships, whatever. So in the very small, like less than a handful of times I've had issues with a client's behaviour. The first time I confronted it, it's so hard. Like you feel like, oh my God, the world's watching and it's so hard. And then you have an honest conversation and it goes one of two ways. But you walk away going, I actually just advocated for my own values and for my team's values. And I'll remember this, one situation where a client was frankly being difficult, being unreasonable and difficult, and trying to, not intentionally, inadvertently holding a gun to our head on a particular thing. And I just said to them, with the greatest of respect, I'm not doing that, and we're not doing that, and here's why. This is the conversation we had. This is what we agreed to. And if this means a parting of ways, it's not what I want, but I certainly am not going to do X, Y, Z. And one of my team messaged me the day later and said, thank you so much for standing up for our values. Not for me, not for her, but for our values. And I knew that day that I was doing something right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so my next question, which you'll probably answer what you've just said, is whether you've walked away from situations where your values are not aligned to the other party.
Thankfully, not very often, because we tend to vet our, without sounding conceited about it, one of the decisions I made early on in the team, in the business life of the business, was the size and scale of the business. So not seeking large scale. We're a team of around about 10-ish. I say that because I'm trying to calculate in my head, but, a really decent boutique team that does amazing work here and globally. But yeah, I remember one of the things that I realised early on is when you make a decision about size and scale, it is so much easier to guard values and be very, very aggressive around the values you have,
very much
and to pick and choose the clients that you partner with. Scale is wonderful if that's your strategy, but it also, the payoff or the price to pay is that you don't get to be, I don't think, as choosy about who you work with. I could be wrong. I might be wrong, but that's just my view.
Look, I think your philosophy sounds terrific. I think there are many people who are struck in positions where their values are compromised, and they struggle to actually call them out and walk away because their career depends on it.
Or here's a question. Do you reckon it's that? I think sometimes it's definitely that. Or a friend of mine once said to me, you have to have the character to sustain the growth that you seek or the position that you seek. So maybe for some people, they get to that point of conflict or that point of their values being tested, and there's actually nothing underpinning their values.
Correct.
So they don't know how to stand up for them because they actually don't know what they stand for.
And I often ask young people when I'm sitting in a forum of how many have actually written down their values and what they'll walk away from and what they won't walk away from.
That's right.
And I would say 5% at the most will put their hand up and say, yes, I've done something about it. But in the main, they don't know.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? I'll give you an example. Not so long ago, someone said to me, they were referring a client into the business, and they said, this blah, 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 this blah, 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 they can be a bit difficult. And I said, I don't care about difficult. Difficult I can deal with in my sleep. Are they honest? And they said, yeah, 100% honest. Okay, great, happy to meet with them.
Absolutely.
And that's the
the
dance.
That's very much the difference.
100%.
And then people say, well, culture and values are the same. Not necessarily.
No.
But they're very similar.
Because sometimes the culture doesn't align with the values. These are the stated values, and for whatever reason, there's this massive gap in between. And that in itself is a whole other session to talk through about why those things happen. But you're quite right. And I know in my own experience, in my own team over the last 2 decades and working with clients around the world on various things, if you have a terrible culture, you got to fix that, not necessarily first, but certainly in conjunction with the external work.
So tell me, in your career, whether it's personal or but preferably in the commercial side, what you're running now, how do you actually go through to articulate the values and beliefs? Do you, in terms of your team, do you have sessions in which you share those sort of
do you mean,
philosophies to educate and develop?
In our team?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Well, developing our values was, back in the day, because we, an established, mature business, was a collaborative effort. And so you've got to have ownership, and obviously that's easier in a boutique firm than it is, say, in a bank or a large law firm or something like that. But being able to articulate things that are meaningful and tangible. So we have, and I'm very proud of this, a culture which, even though it's my company and I'm the boss technically, not technically, practically I am. Don't know why I shrugged that off, but I reassure you, I do actually run the business.
You're hiding behind a bigger brand than that.
We have an open culture which encourages respectful challenging. Like even last night, I sent an email to the team about a certain thing that we're considering, and I got 3 different responses with 3 different perspectives, all of which were amazing and valid, and now we're teasing them out together. So that is a practical outworking of our values. I laugh. I mean, you'll have seen these sorts of contracts. You get these contracts and they go, please state your anti-corruption policy. Don't be corrupt. Simple. That's my policy. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you have to ask these things to articulate like 15 pages of why you shouldn't be corrupt, there's something wrong there.
Absolutely.
Again, an example of I knew when I was doing something right many, many years ago, a team member came to me after work one night and expressed concern about some behaviours she'd seen in someone else and all of this sort of stuff. And it wasn't about the person. It was actually, this doesn't align with our values. It wasn't, I don't like that person. I think that person is X, Y, Z. That behaviour didn't align with our values. And that creates a space which is non-confrontational, non-accusatory. It's here,
Yeah.
And another phrase we like to use in the business is when we're considering decisions, myself and the leadership team, whether it's staffing or client or whatever, does it serve the business? Not does it serve Gemma, because that would be funny, but does it serve the business?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a philosophy of leadership. Good leadership, it's about the business, not about me.
Yeah.
So values are something you share within the business. Do your people, do they share their own values? Do you know what the values are of the people within your business? That's number one.
Yes.
And number 2, how much time do you spend with your people helping them develop their personal brand?
Okay. Number 1, yes, because they wouldn't be in a team like mine if the values weren't aligned. And they're demonstrated day in, day out, how we treat each other. We have an environment, again, another phrase we like to use is we set each other up for success. I am so proud of that part of my team. Like I can't overstate it. We genuinely set each other up for success. And if somebody's fallen off the perch with a family situation or they're not well or something, you never have to say, okay, who can do this? It's literally, oh, I'll do it. Oh, no, I can do it. That sort of thing. What was the second question, sorry?
So how much time do you spend
on their personal brand?
On personal
To be
branding?
honest, not a lot, in fact.
When branding is so important in
But I
terms
think
of your
it's because,
organisation.
but we collectively think about the business brand, not of individual brands. Like I'm a little bit of an anomaly, but that's because my background is what my background is.
Yeah.
Like I write one column once a week, so as a percentage of my time, it's not huge, but I've gotten an understanding in the last 3 years since I've been writing for The Australian about the impact of the pen. It's quite a lot more than I anticipated, but we let our work speak for ourselves, and look, my team each have outstanding personal brands, if I must say so, but they brought those to the table. One of my team is, he's been on the board of many national organisations. Another one is a member of the Perth City Council. Another one of my team, she's very active in certain parts of the community. And I don't work with them directly on it, but I facilitate and champion and cheer them on and give them the freedom to invest in that part of their life.
They're people who've come to you in general terms, who've already got a strong brand.
Sense of self, sense of who they are,
You're the champion of GT Communications. One could say, and I think can say very clearly, it's a great brand.
Thank you.
Right? Within the industry, for which to some extent you sit as the
chief
champion
cook and bottle washer
and the leader of that organisation.
Yeah, sure.
Have you ever thought about if GT Communication wasn't there, what would your brand look like? How would you actually position yourself? So let me give you a corollary to where I'm going. So many CEOs, owners, etc., their identity is tied up in their corporation.
Sure.
And when the corporation is no longer, they haven't actually
considered
and worked through what it looks like when they don't have that corporation, because they
Right.
hide behind
Yeah.
that, whether they admit it or not.
Yes.
And they haven't been able to make that step, and it is a real challenge. Now, our parents' generation would have had more of that in their
Yes,
life,
yes.
because there was a 20, 30-year type of environment
Yeah.
where you stick with the same
Yeah, that's right. It was a
organisation.
career job.
We don't have it these days,
Yeah.
but it is important. And you see so many, and you hear so many people who they've left the job and all of a sudden they fall into depression,
I see what
they
you mean.
struggle,
Yeah.
etc. And a lot of it's to do with their relevance deprivation,
Yeah.
number one,
Yeah.
but also the fact that their identity was tied up in what
Yeah.
they were doing.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
So
So
it's a
have I
question.
thought about it? I haven't thought about it, but I would probably say that because I'm, again, like I moved to, some of our listeners might know, I moved to Sydney 2 years ago, and that was a huge stretch for me personally. And I can say with certainty that I've changed, hopefully for the better. And I think the stretch of that initial 2 years and the challenge and all of the hard, and very many hard days, not often that consultancies or any businesses move Perth to Sydney. It's usually Sydney to Perth. So we sort of swam like the salmon upstream.
Unless you ship containers, because it's
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. I would say that my own personal brand, minus the business, would be one of a sound business mind, sound strategist, clear communicator, open person. I think that's really important. Like an open person, and hopefully a good writer who listens well. That's really confronting. It's hard to talk about yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Thinking about what I do for a living, and it's like, I feel really
But
uncomfortable.
it actually you start stripping out
Yeah.
what is actually your value.
Can we dive into a personal space? Am I
Sure.
allowed?
Yeah, whatever
so,
you like.
So everything you just...
You want to ask me a question?
No. I just want to give another analogy that really speaks to what you said.
Yeah.
So, and again, this comes... See, Garry, you've got me on the chair. This comes to what we were talking about earlier, about how much of your life you get to share with people and what's personal, what's private. So, not the first person to be divorced, won't be the last. But I remember really vividly, because I was married quite young, I was a child bride, and was a single woman at 39 and did not have a clue who I was. Didn't have a clue who I was. And I remember being, I remember that struggle of identity, because my identity was wrapped up in being married.
Yep.
And outside of that marriage, I did not know who I was.
Yep.
I did not have a clue. So at that stage, I'd been in business about 8 years, 9 years. And so the business was sort of doing well, and, it was doing well, it was thriving. But I didn't, on a personal level, I had no clue who I was. So that was a really important journey for me over the next, I don't know, I'd be guessing 3 to 5 years, coming out of that space, walking into another one and working out, well, what do I stand for? Who am I? What do I like to do? What do I do for fun these days? What do I enjoy to do? What are my absolutes? What are the things I will bend on? All of those things. It's a really similar sort of dynamic. If you've been a CEO, a successful high-profile CEO for 10 years, 5 years, whatever, you come out of that job, all of a sudden it's like, well, what am I? So powerful identity, isn't it?
It's very, very important. If I am to make any observation about you, I would make the comment that you have many strings to your bow apart from GT. It's whether you actually have the mindset to recognise that.
Ooh. Tell me more, doctor.
Because of all the other activities you undertake, you
Yeah.
actually undertake it. I actually see you as Gemma, not as GT communication.
Interesting.
And so I think that that's very important when you're trying to work through, if you in fact need to do that, that there's so many other components to you which make up your personal brand.
That's so interesting, isn't it?
So I just make that
No, that's lovely to
observation.
hear, and I'll take that away and chew it over. Actually, as you're talking, the other thing that's going through my head is like, I'm an auntie, I'm a good friend, I'm told, humbly, all of those things that make up the sum total of who you are.
Exactly. So then the next step to that is, how do I Gemma, maintain my relevance in everything I do in life? What is the things that are going to keep me? Because if your brand is who you say it is, and I think it's something that evolves. How do you maintain that relevance with your family, your friends, your circles in life? What are the things you need to do that's going to keep them engaged, you adding the value you want to add, and you enjoying everything you do?
Well, I think it's about being deliberate. I really do. I think you can either float through life or be deliberate in life. And living on the other side of the country from my family now has been really, like, to be really transparent with everyone, it's been the hardest thing. I'm not from a big family. I'm from a small family, and my father passed away mid-2019, so everything felt very truncated and heightened.
Yep.
So lots of FaceTime with my family, lots of, we call, my mum and I chat a bit, and my aunt, my nieces, and my nephew lives down in Melbourne. But I think being deliberate about it, and I found the hardest thing about living in Sydney is how the frenetic pace of life here, and just things that were simple in Perth. Love you, Perth, but things that were simple in Perth are not simple here. No. By any means, getting from A to B. Don't get me wrong, I love Sydney. It's a great fit for me. You're stuck with me, New South Wales. I just need to pick a rugby league team. I haven't picked one yet.
But don't rush.
Yeah. I don't understand the game, so I'm not really in a hurry. But
you never invest in anything until you understand.
Correct. Don't sign it if you don't understand it. So we could be a while here. But yeah, how do I maintain relevance? Well, I suppose from a client perspective, it's that continual learning and continual improvement. That's really important. And continually listening. You can't advise people if you're not listening to them, whether that's to challenge or to amplify or to validate.
Absolutely.
You have to listen. Which is ironic because I love to chat, but I'm a pretty good listener.
You've had a wonderful career so far, and I'm sure it's got a long way to go.
Hopefully. 50 feels like just the beginning.
Who stands out in your career, your life, as someone who has helped you and mentored you to where you are today?
Oh gosh, there's actually been a few at different stages.
That's natural. That's normal.
Different stages of my career. Actually, a really good point to raise, because when I talk to young people about mentoring, and I think the session you and I did together, I may have mentioned this. No one has ever offered to mentor me. I hate to burst everybody's sort of thoughts here. No one's ever come up and said, Gemma, you're amazing, let me mentor you. I simply asked people. I think that's one of the things, the values I got from mum and dad, is don't be afraid to ask. There's no shame in asking. So I remember when I was younger in the business, like when the business was super young, there was a chap by the name of Harvey Collins, who was chair of Westpac Bank. I don't know if you know Harvey. His daughter was a friend of mine, and Harvey was just so generous with his time. But it was like, for me, that serious space in the business was, I don't know how to price properly. I don't know how to, like, it was mechanics of the business. Other times of the business, different other people. My dear friend of mine, Gav Bain, who I spoke to last night. Gav's the recent CEO of Wunderman Thompson here in Sydney, but a Perth businessman, and we met when my business was about 3 to 5 years old, and he's just been a great sounding board, friend, mentor, and tells me I've been the same, so that's always welcome. And more recently in Sydney, literally a handful of people that I'm a bit, I don't want to mention them without their permission, if that's okay.
No, of course not. No, I was just asking.
No, I wasn't sure. But also, I think my view is it's really important to have mentors outside of your circle and your sector.
Absolutely imperative.
Because you add value based on the objectivity. So
let me go the other way.
Yeah.
Do you mentor young people to help them with their pathway in their career?
I do. And it's been a variety. Most recently, I mentored a young person who was looking for a career in law, and that was around, lots of things, all of the things that you struggle with as a final year university student looking to start your career. Most of all, it's the behavioural stuff. These are kids who are smart, and I say kids not condescending, it's just because I'm fitty, right?
Sure.
These are young, smart, intelligent young people for whom the world is it's a complicated place. It's more complicated than when I was 20 starting my career. And just helping them navigate those things, and mostly listening and asking questions. What would you do? What do you think? But if you did this, that sort of stuff. Because you don't want to tell people what to do. You want to help them arrive at the right decision.
Correct.
Yeah.
A whiteboard, as we say.
Yeah, that's it.
And bouncing off ideas,
that's it.
etc.
Sanity check. I call it a sanity check.
Mentoring, the big challenge, you talk about young people not understanding, how to get a mentor, but go and ask.
Yeah.
But the issue is, how do they ask? Because sometimes
Sure.
if anything, they're worried about rejection. Because you ask someone and they get
Knocked back.
So my recommendation and advice to any young person is find or identify who they aspire, who they really admire and look up to, and contact them directly. And
course.
say to them, can you recommend who could mentor me?
Yep.
Don't ask directly. And that way, the person's either going to say, I'll do it,
Yeah.
or I'll recommend someone.
That's a great strategy. And I think another way to approach it is go to someone that you know or trust and say, can you help me identify someone? Do you know anyone who might help mentor me? I've done that before. But to your other point about maybe getting rejected, I would say, get used to it. Life's full of rejections. I'm not being callous, but seriously, toughen up, because you get knocked back and then you just pick yourself up and you keep going again. And I remember a woman who agreed to mentor me. She was very senior in one of the big 4 banks, and just didn't gel. We just didn't gel. We had one mentoring dinner, I took her out for dinner, and it was like the wrong pair of shoes. Nothing wrong with her, nothing wrong with me.
No.
It just didn't work.
And I always do when I'm mentoring, it's a try before you buy.
Yeah.
Let's have a couple of sessions. If you don't like it, I'm not going to be upset.
Yeah.
And if I don't like it, I'll tell you as well.
Yeah. But I do think the resilience piece, and if you're talking about personal brand, I would definitely say that one of my attributes is resilience. I just, again, and that comes back from family of origin stuff and the story of my grandparents and all of that sort of stuff. And I just don't have any time for people who have a propensity toward victimhood. It's just not something that I have. And the team is like this as well. It's like, boo-hoo, cry me a river. It's not to say that I'm not empathetic. I'm 100% empathetic, but not for things that are trite and not for things that are really something that you need to just... I'll give you an example. If I may. Had many years ago now, I had a team member come to me and say, such and such is bullying me at such and such client. And I remember sitting at my desk and I popped my head up and said, say that again. And this person said, such and such is bullying me. And I went, okay, all right, so I want you to think about it overnight, because bullying is a really serious matter.
Absolutely.
And it triggers, from my perspective as your employer, it triggers a process that I have to put in place legally and from a duty of care, because I care about you. And then it triggers something that I have to put in place with the client. So if this is actually happening, I have got your back 1,000%, make no mistake. But I want you to think about what you're telling me and reflect, if it's true, where I have to remove you from that client, we have to do this, and this. If that's the case, I'm in, and I'm not going to blink twice. But I knew this person, and I knew certain things about, just a bit of resistance to personal growth. Anyway, so I left it with them for, I think it was a couple of days. And I said, in the meantime, if you are uncomfortable, we can temporarily put someone else there. Did all of the things that you do as a responsible and decent employer. Anyway, they came back to me a couple of days later and said, you know what, I've thought about it and I've talked about it with a friend and I really just don't like this person. And I said, great. I wasn't angry at them at all. I said, that's really good personal growth that you've recognised that. So let's sit down together and put together a plan about how to manage this, how you can grow, how I can back you up, because some of this behaviour is 100% inappropriate. Not inappropriate, but just bratty. And you talk about values, I won't have it. I won't have you being spoken to like that, but it's not bullying. I ended up having a fantastic relationship, and I mean long-term relationship with that client, fantastic growth for that person. Sometimes I think in corporate life we're too quick to go, oh my God, you've definitely been bullied, or you've definitely been there. As an employer you have a duty of care, but as a human and a decent human, that, to my perspective, supersedes your legal obligation.
Absolutely.
It's your moral obligation. And there are certain things that you, like, to be very clear to our listeners, if someone came to me and said I was inappropriately spoken to, that's not something I'd go, are you sure? That's instant action. I just, resilience is a really important piece, especially for younger people today.
It's part of success.
Of course it is.
If you're not resilient, you're actually not going to move forward and stretch yourself and be that ambitious that you think you should be or could be.
I met a woman the other week who we're talking to about some work, and she told me her story first time we met. Business is mature, organisation's quite mature, but she was telling me about her early days and the number of funding cliffs she nearly went over the edge of. Like, just incredible resilience to be where she is now. I don't know if I would have persevered, to be honest, but the perseverance and resilience of this woman is just absolutely out of this world, and we so undervalue it.
Totally agree.
You know?
Well, the thing is, we don't see it. We only
That's
see
true.
the outcome. This is the problem.
That's true.
And that the outcomes, those who are successful have demonstrated resilience, but you don't actually see it in the journey because people hide a lot of it.
I heard someone say something the other day. It was a podcast I was listening to, and they said, you know, the person that you don't see the scars or something like that. You don't see the scars that the person you envy carries from the road they walk to get where you want to be.
Oh, okay.
It's a bit there, but I thought,
Yeah, but it's absolutely true.
It's true. Totally true, you know.
What a session we've been.
I feel like I've had a really good chat. I'm just warming up, Garry.
It's been fabulous, Gemma, to
Thank you
have
for having
the opportunity. Your frank, candid comments and advice and insights have been amazing.
Thank
and
you.
I'm so privileged to have the opportunity to chat with you.
Thank you for having me on
thank
board. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Love having a chat. And again, thank you for asking me. It's been great fun.
Been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it immensely. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe for more episodes. And if you'd like to learn more about developing your personal brand, please visit garrybrowne.com.au to get in touch or grab a copy of Brand New, Brand You.